Diabetes is a serious chronic health threat.
Diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes.
With diabetes.
Type 1
Diabetes.
diabetes. About diabetes.
Diabetes.
Anything can go wrong.
Pre-diabetes.
Diabetes.
It's amazing how much everything affects your blood sugar.
My name is Jack Spotted Eagle. I'm a member of the Okanagan Indian Band. On the Okanagan Lake, which is near the city of Vernon. Lived here most of my life. I got diagnosed with diabetes probably about 15 years ago. But prior to that, I was on the borderline, supposedly. I was told I was borderline, and I was about 4 years, and then I was diagnosed as having the full-blown diabetes. When I got diagnosed, my sugars were 20, which is very high, and it was like a few years later that I went on to insulin, and right away I was put on metformin. It's been a challenge. It's not fun being a diabetic because you can't just eat anything you want when you're not supposed to. And a lot of restrictions. A few years ago when I was in Phoenix and I was visiting friends and I got on a scale, it was 250, and I go, I'm not 250. My friends would go, yes, you are. And I was. And then I did not go on a diet or anything. I just unconsciously chose to lose weight. And because right now I'm around 190 and 200, which isn't too bad. But yeah, 250 was chunky. Nothing changed really, even when I was diagnosed. I mean, there is nothing changed. And I mean, should we go and see the doctor and he'd do some tests and stuff. I guess the biggest difference, since I'm a diabetic, every 3 months I get my blood work done, my A1Cs. And that's helpful to me and to the doctor, because basically it's a mechanism to show that whether my blood sugars are increasing or decreasing. So probably that's one of the biggest differences is every 3 months having the blood work done. Those of us who are older, well, when we get together, we talk about, we're diabetic. There's a lot of us who are diabetic, and it's not confidential. It's like community knowledge. When you know what's going on with people, I think you'll be able to give more support rather than people pretending that they're fine and well when they're not. I think it's important that people know that they share information with each other.
I want to go to my grandmother's picture. When people make an impression on me, I remember them by quotes, and the quote that she said, it was just an observation that she was making within our community. And she says to the room, like in her house, our people are getting sick and dying because we're not eating our traditional foods anymore. And everything that I've been learning as a dietitian and everything I've been learning about my cultures, absolutely, I think that plays a huge role in why diabetes is so prevalent in our communities. And when you look at the history of diabetes within First Nations communities, you go back and look at statistics and when it starts to really prevail, really it's after residential schools and exponential growth since residential schools. And so to me, it becomes like, I'm looking at, the question becomes like, well, why is that? And then so I start to look at the history and like, what was so different but before then and after.
Really understanding what happened to our Indigenous population with regards to colonization and the Western diet that they've been exposed to, and how the traditional foods that were originally consumed by by their people have completely been kind of left behind, because a big part of that culture is not part of the community anymore. So now they're eating Western foods, and if a patient lives several hours away from their local town, or even half an hour away from their local town, and they don't have reliable transportation, that means that their food cupboards will be stocked with foods that last longer. And those foods tend to be higher sugar content, they tend to be higher sodium and salt content, and they tend to be, packets of chips or pop or things that are just going to last the family longer. And those are foods that are associated with the development of diabetes.
The residential schools did not have indigenous food. It was Western food, and even that food wasn't the greatest. So that factored in to present day diets. The change of diet, like when the Europeans first arrived, we were eating mostly traditional foods. Because of the assimilation, we bought into Western food, and so have the foreigners. The people of color who come to Canada, they are eating European types of food, and their sugar levels and their diabetic numbers are going up because they've adopted a Western model of food also. So they're being affected.
When I look at my culture, Gitsan culture, the Gitsan culture, I look at the traditional food system, and when I look at that and I'm trying to study it and learn about it, I see that they had a huge range of different colors of foods in the diet that we don't eat all the time anymore. I see body movement. So when I talk to elders, they're talking about getting up first thing in the morning, getting to work and moving their bodies and harvesting food. And then what we see today is it's not as a variety in the communities. It's a lot of processed foods, market foods, and not so much the traditional foods.
I think going to the Western diet really affected our health out here, because there's more and more people becoming diabetic, and when you buy the food in the store, it's saturated with sugars, and knowing that, it's like, okay, potatoes, the sugar, then rice has a lot of sugar. I mean, a lot of the white product like flour, rice, have a lot of sugars in them.
I remember going out to our traditional territories, and we'd go out and see these huge fields of huckleberries and blueberries, and we'd spend all day just picking them and filling up buckets, and then put it into one of the trucks, my grandfather's truck, and then like our whole family would do it, like 10 to 20 people, and would fill up like a whole truck bed full of them, and then bring it back to our homes, and my grandparents would harvest it, can it, process it, whichever way. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because we don't do that anymore. I don't see that in the communities anymore. That's not happening anymore. And that was part of the traditional food system, in my opinion, is that we're moving our bodies all day, gathering all those berries, right? And we're spending out time in nature. We're just living by what nature tells us, right?
Individuals go berry picking. They do that. Some people go sage gathering. People go root digging and berry picking other parts of the valley. I think that could be, I don't know if the band should promote it, because individuals do that. But I think it would be good if a group of people did maybe went to Spokane for Camas root digging, or went down to Penticton area for root digging. I think that would be beneficial, but a lot of people do that on their own in families.
It's a traditional food that goes goes back a millennia, and that's always been part of our culture. To me, that makes sense that our elders would say that's their medicine.
How do we really understand those patients and meet them where they're at? And especially getting more dietitians trained in understanding Indigenous culture, as well as the foods that are really important within their culture, I think is going to be really important.
When we're looking at the things that increase our risk for diabetes, we split into modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. The modifiable risk factors are things like diet and exercise, things that we can change, and the non-modifiable risk factors are things that we can't, like family history and genetics. Different populations have a different risk of developing diabetes. Some have a low risk, and comparably, some are over 3 times higher. One theory to why this is because our bodies become adapted to our environment over generations, and when the environment is suddenly changed, the pancreas isn't able to handle the extra stress, and then loses function quicker. Couple that with other things like loss of cultural identity and the effects of colonization, and the situation gets much more damaging.
Is watching how people of color, some of them are treated as compared to non-people of color. Then there's also the other factor. People who they deem to be drug addicts are treated differently than people who aren't. So there's a lot of prejudice of staff towards people of color and to people who have addictions. So they're treated differently. Mm-hmm. I think those need to be improved.
To really provide culturally safe care and to understand where patients are at and where they come from, we need to firstly acknowledge that colonization happened and how it affected patients who identify as Indigenous Métis. We need to acknowledge the fact that systemic racism is still very much alive in the medical system, and that very often the odds are stacked against our patients to be able to access care, because there just isn't that trust in the healthcare system. And here at the Redland Community Clinic, one of our mottos is that we would like to help foster trust within the Canadian healthcare system again. It's important for us to listen to our Indigenous patients and to understand what they're telling us their story is, to understand what their experiences have been with other healthcare providers, or when they've accessed emergency rooms and they've experienced racism. And acknowledging that is really important in order for us to move forward and build those relationships so that patients can actually trust us as their care providers.
If you have a concern, what you can do about it, there's no directions, I don't think. Unless I'm missing the boat, I don't think there are. There needs to be guidelines. If you are dissatisfied with service or you feel that you can be better served elsewhere, this is what you need to do, this is who you need to talk to. I don't think there's anything at the hospital with those directions of what to do. I think you're writing to the Minister of Health, writing to the administration at the hospital, to the First Nations Health Authority, Interior Health. I think those are all important. Agencies that you can write letters of complaint. If you don't say anything, nothing's going to change.
Trauma rates are quite high in Indigenous groups, and that generational trauma is a very real reality, right? And that it takes something like 6 or 7 generations before generational trauma cycle is broken. And so we're honestly really just at the very beginning of patients who still have to go through the generational trauma of their parents being in residential school or their grandparents being in residential school. So, what are we doing to address that and to recognize this trauma? Because of all of these years of colonization and patients' experiences, mental health is a big concern, and mental health resources just aren't always available. For example, mental health counseling, drug and alcohol counseling. And so if your mental health is really struggling and you're struggling with your mental health, so you're feeling depressed or anxious, you're constantly worried about things, or you might be self-medicating.
The people on the street using drugs are self-medicating. They get childhood traumas that they haven't dealt with. And I'm sure that a lot of those individuals also have diabetes, plus other health issues that affect them and health that affect them. Usually people who are sexually abused put on the weight as a means of protection, and they're addicted to food. They won't start wearing dark colors so they're not seen. So sexual abuse is a big trauma, which does cause addictions to food and other things. People who are alcoholic they're addicted to alcohol because they're numbing, they're self-medicating.
Often people will self-medicate either with alcohol or cannabis or any other drug of any choice. Some people it's exercise. There's lots of things that people do to try to make themselves feel better. Ultimately, the challenge is trying to understand how much benefit these self-treatments are and what the risks of these self-treatments are. In the terms of mental health, it's a big problem because of the volatility of alcohol. When we talked about units in the past, units tells us how quickly you can remove about 1 unit an hour. So, you have your half a bottle of a handle of alcohol, and you're going to be having alcohol in your system for more than a day. And in those circumstances, the side effects that you get from alcohol can be quite harmful. And the secondary side effects can be headaches, dehydration, weight gain, general life destruction. And for someone who has mental health problems, alcohol is a really terrible drug to use. In the population of people who have mental health, I like to say that alcohol should be a happy time drug and not an unhappy time drug. And if you're using it as an unhappy time drug, then it's going to become a big problem in your life. Happy time drug, well, that can be tricky when you have mental health because sometimes you don't have the happy times. So maybe, if we could discourage the use of that and perhaps of other drugs.
I guess what I could say about alcohol is that it can diminish your liver health, right? And that's another area that I'm interested in. That's another area that's starting to prevail with complications within the Indigenous communities is liver health, and alcohol is going to be very disruptive for liver health. And then you think about liver health and the liver and what it does for our body. It takes care of so many actions that are just to help our bodies live daily life. And so you're kind of putting your health at risk with alcohol, in my opinion. So I stay away from it.
The basic addict learned how to self-medicate. And sugar with someone who's obese, that's it's like taking drugs. So it's like, I think those have to be factored in. So yes, I think if you went to the day school or residential school, you can have health issues. Because if you don't deal with it, it can kill you.
You are going to struggle to remember to take your diabetes medication. You're going to struggle to remember to eat the correct foods because you're constantly focusing on how unwell you feel mentally. So it's important to focus on patients' wellness as an entire person and not just on their disease, and realizing that their mental well-being is going to be just as important to get them better in the end.
Heart disease has related to stress and other issues. I mean, people who are overweight, their hardening of their arteries or the the arteries get clogged. So I think there's all kinds of different health issues from being a diabetic or being addicted to foods. And I think most addicts have a trauma that they need to deal with. They need to go to the core of the problem. Otherwise, they're going to continue with their addiction and their unhealthiness. Finding a good therapist, going to therapy, and talking about it, I think are important to the healing. There are people out here who've gone to the day school, like, nothing happened to me. It was a good experience. Like, okay, well, I guess it was for you, but it wasn't for everybody. What's needed is more information, more posters, more brochures. Perhaps I think staff should be going and doing home visits and doing one-to-one with families regarding diabetic prevention and other prevention. There's other illnesses out here also.
Establishing more kind of land-based programs where those traditions are taught to the younger generation might be helpful. I think getting more healthcare providers who are trained in providing dietary support, for example, dietitians or diabetic educators, to go to the patient's home community instead of the patients having to always travel into the offices of providers. I think that's going to be really important. Community support for patients who have chronic illnesses such as diabetes is so important, because if the community doesn't lift patients up and give them those supports, their conditions usually just don't improve. Living with a chronic condition in isolation and feeling alone with it usually leads to other health concerns like becoming depressed or struggling with weight loss and just not getting better. So getting those community supports, especially in the form of diabetes educators and dietitians and exercise specialists, as well as nursing support and family physician or nurse practitioner support, really go hand in hand with getting our patients with diabetes to get better.
One of the most important aspects of diabetes care is self-management education, which takes individualization into account. This includes lifestyle, cultural backgrounds, and individual needs. That's why culture and ethnicity is so important.
That's part of Indigenous perspectives, is the aspect of stories. It's very valuable to, I think, our cultures, and there's so many stories we can tell, and I think that's part of like addressing a lot of the barriers and gaps between the, I guess, colonial systems that we see and the Indigenous communities. There's over 200 different communities in the province of First Nations peoples, and each community is very unique in themselves and their culture. A common theme that I see with a lot of communities is the stories. Not the exact same stories, but there are stories that, and the stories play a huge role within the culture, and definitely within the culture that I grew up in. I think a lot of it is not always being utilized, and I think it plays a huge role in a lot of ways. There's lots of stories around animals, and they give animals like human characteristics and all of that, and from my perspective, that develops a type of respect for the animals and the land. And those are stories that we're developing a society to respect the land and take care of the land and understand how we fit in this world.
I think it's important for not just Indigenous people, but all people to be able to become aware and learn and to ask the questions. Some of us are quite open to sharing information.
You can reach out to elders, the local elders within the community, and if you don't have contacts with local elders, reach out to the community in general and then just get to know them and talk to them. And that's why I always kind of say, like, with people who are kind of looking from the outside, are looking to collaborate or partner, to me, it always starts with a conversation.
It's up to us as healthcare providers to make ourselves competent and to truly listen to our patients, trust their experiences, and believe them. Because often It's a matter of just believing your patient when they tell you, this has been my experience, validating that, and truly trying to be a partner with the patient instead of feeling like you know best because you're the healthcare provider. Patients know best. It's their health journey, and we can only partner with them, right?
Talking to a medical professional about specifics regarding diabetes or other health issues or concerns that you may have. I think it's important to obtain the knowledge, to learn it, and then also to share it. And if there's diabetics in your family, talk to them. Enjoy life. You can have sweets, but you have to supposedly plan for it. But just enjoy life. Live each day at a time is important. Eat the cake because tomorrow might not be here.
Thanks for joining us to learn about diabetes in high-risk groups so we can work together to help keep each other happy and healthy. Next time, we'll talk to Alexis to understand life with gestational diabetes, its causes, symptoms, and complications. Discover the impacts on both mother and baby, including the future risk of type 2 diabetes, while emphasizing the importance of postpartum follow-up and diabetes screening.